Hi everyone. So welcome back to our audit class. Hope you all are learning and understanding the series. So today's topic will be internal control. And under this topic, we will cover certain aspects of internal control, such as definition and objectives, components or elements of the internal control, limitations of internal control, and regulations of the internal control. I hope you all are understanding, and if you have any queries, please do let me in the comments so that I can address those queries. So, to begin with, the objectives of internal control. So, firstly, what is internal control? Okay. So, internal control is a process affected by the entity's board of director, management, and other personnel designed to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of the objectives we will discuss, but the internal control is something that is made by the management, the TCWG of the company, to achieve the objectives. What are the objectives that has to be achieved? So reporting, compliance, and operations. These are the three main objectives of internal control to achieve it. So reporting, compliance, and operations. Under reporting, what comes? So under reporting is the reliable internal, external, financial, and non-financial reporting. So all the financials data and even the non-financials data, such as management data, all these reporting that has to be reported comes under the reporting. Compliance means to adhere the laws and regulations, those are applicable for the organization. And under operations comes the effectiveness and efficiency of the business operations. So these three are the broad and primary objective for which internal control is designed, so that all these three are in the place, all these three are in the proper place, so that an organization can function effectively and efficiently. What are the components of the internal control? So there are total five components of the internal control, and those are control environment, risk assessment, information and communication system, monitoring, and existence of control activities. So if in the mnemonics, if you talk, it sits as crime. C for control environment, R for risk assessment, I for information and communication system, M for monitoring, and E for existence of control system. You can read it or learn it by saying crime. Again, I am repeating the last one time: control environment, risk assessment, information and communication system, monitoring, and communication existence of the control systems. So under control activity, now we will discuss all these 5 points in further details. So to begin with the control environment, control environment sets the standards, processes, and structures that provide the basis for the carrying out the internal control across the organization. So any processes or standards or structures which makes the base for the internal control. So the board of the directors or the senior management establishes the tone at the top. We had discussed this previously also. So this is the important phase by the top management to understand the importance of the internal control, including the expected standards of the conduct. Also, management reinforces the expectations at the various levels of the organizations, and also has the pervasive impact on the overall system. So control environment acts as a base for the overall system of the internal control. Control environment further has sub factors from which it is made, from which this base is determined. So it has primarily six further factors, and all those are component individuals, organizational structure, performance, TCWG, ethical values, responsibility assignment. So control individuals are the processes to attract and to retain them, to attract and retain the internal control. Organization structure is the appropriate structure and reporting lines such as segregation of the duties. Performance means to drive the accountability for the performance via rigor around performance measure, incentive and rewards. So basically by the HR to analyze the performance, to analyze the yearly performance and uh, to give the proper reward to the deserving one. TCWG means those charged with governments have the parameters for enabling the board of directors to carry out the governance and oversight responsibilities. Ethical values to come for the commitment to the integrity and ethical values, and responsibility assignment to define, assign, and limit the authority of the responsibility. So these six were the further factors for the control environment from which the control environment is made. All these were the basis for the control environment. There are certain principles for this control environment, such as commitment to the integrity and ethical value. Board of directors demonstrate independence from the management and exercise oversight of the development and performance of internal control. Management establishes with board oversight structures, reporting lines, and appropriate authorities and responsibilities in the pursuit of the objectives. Commitment to attract, develop, and retain the competent individuals in alignment with the objectives. Hold individuals accountable for their internal control responsibilities. So these principles were again derived from the factors that we already discussed right now. So these principles were, I will say that explanation or the keywords from the factors that have been derived, so that these principles can be followed all the time. Few examples which might raise the concern for the control environment are having excessive pressure on the management to meet the financial targets, domination of the management by the single person, or the lack of culture of honesty or ethical behavior. So these are the certain challenges which might impact the basis for the creation of the control environment. Now, our second element was the risk assessment. In detail, risk assessment is something we will be discussing throughout the audit series, and it has a lot of importance in audit. Like risk assessment is something we can't ignore or that cannot be left out. So in this scenario, in this control environment, internal control scenario, risk assessment is the dynamic and iterative process for the identification, analysis, and the management of the risk. Risk is basically possibility that event will occur and adversely affect the achievements of the objectives. Also, to manage the risks are considered relative to established risk tolerance. Risks are based on the basis of their tolerance levels. So principles to understand the risk are specific objectives with certain sufficient clarity, identify the risk to achieve the objectives, and analyze the risk on the basis of how it should be managed, and consider the potential for the fraud in assessing risk and identifying the significant changes that would impact internal control. So these four are important principles while assessing the risk. Now our third element was information and communication. Communication of the relevant and quality information to support the functioning of internal control. A proper communication is always required. So both internally and externally within the entity and also with the external parties that we are dealing with, a proper channel of the communication should be there. For the principles to adhere the communication information and communications are to obtain or generate the use relevant and quality information to support the internal control, communicate internally, communicate externally. So communication should be quality, having the quality information internally and externally. So these three are the prima facie principles for understanding information and communication element of the internal control. Our fourth point was monitoring in the elements. So monitoring here is the ascertaining whether each pipe component of internal control is present and functioning. So at the monitoring stage, we see that if the IC, the internal control that has been implemented, is working and is in function or not. So this can be done, this can be checked by ongoing evaluations or separate evaluations. Under ongoing evaluation, it is basically built into the business processes at different levels of the entity to provide the timely information. And at the separate evaluation, it is conducted periodically, which varies in the scope and the frequency depending on the assessment of the risk, effectiveness, and every other external factors. So the principles for the monitoring, there are again two important principles to keep in the mind to understand the monitoring process: to select, develop, and perform the ongoing and separate evaluations, as I said right now, and evaluate and communicate internal control deficiencies on the timely basis. So first, to analyze either through the ongoing or the separate evaluations, and to have the proper and timely communication if anything is missing, so that that can be rectified in the timely manner. Last but not the least element of our internal control was existence of the control activities. So here, after monitoring, we come understand that we analyze that the control activities are in existence or not. So the policies and procedures that helps to identify or ensure the management directives are carried out to perform at the all the levels of the entity at the various stages. So all the levels, all the stages through the technological environment. So it may be preventive or detective in the nature, and it may encompass the manual or automated activities. So all this depends upon the how an organization is working, under which condition an organization is working. There are three important principles to be kept in the mind for understanding the existence of the control activities, and those are: select and develop the control activities that contribute to the mitigation of the risk to the achievement of the objectives. Select and develop the general control over technology. So general control activities should be selected over the technological controls. Deploy the control through the policies that establish when what is expected and in procedures that put into the action. Some of the examples of the control activities might include the performance reviews, like time to time system check, or the financials check, or anything such reviews. Time to time timely reviews can be one of the example to understand the existence of the control activities. Again, another can be general IT controls or application controls, depending upon the nature or depending upon the environment under which an organization is functioning. uh, Also, we can understand the segregation of the duties, like proper segregation of duties is divided among the personnel or not, depending upon their experience, depending upon their relevant experience and knowledge. So, under segregation of the duties, we understand the four further points. Like these 4 points are considered while analyzing the segregation of the duties. So, these are authorization, recording, custody, and comparison. Authorization of approval or transactions. Okay, so proper transaction is authorized or not. Recording the transactions which has been authorized has been recorded or not. Custody of the asset, under which person is the custody of the assets are given, are those relevant and genuine person or not. Comparison via independent checks and evaluations. Time to time comparison and evaluations are done basis to their yearly performance and everything. So our next topic is the limitations of the internal control. Everything has the limitations, so do the internal control have. So here, limitations such as even an effective internal control can be a failure in an organization, because internal control's purpose is to provide a reasonable assurance and not the absolute assurance. Management should be aware of the limitations when selecting the developing or deploying the internal control, so that they can minimize the extent risk to the certain extent. Limitations can be competence issues, obsolescence, collusion, override by the management, or constraints. So constraint is that entities may have cost benefit constraints. Override by the management, like management has the ability to override the internal control. Collusion may be ability of the management other person to circumvent controls through collusion. Obsolescence means even the events outside the organization control may arise and render existing the internal control. And competence issue like human judgment, human failures, all this comes under the competence issues. So these were certain prima facie points which can describe the limitations of the internal control. Again, there are certain regulations which specifically define the internal controls. Depending upon the country's act, each country's is its own act, and the gap they are applying to their financials reporting. So this varies from country to country and is specifically applicable to certain countries. So I hope that you understood the internal control, the limitations, and the elements and everything here. If you have any queries, do let me know in the comments and I will surely resolve it. Thank you for staying connected and see you in the next chapter. Bye.